Welcome to the Center Mid Philosopher. This episode is brought to you by Augustus Royale Fashion. Life's not black and white, it's gray, and gray is beautiful. Check out the brand below in the link. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to this week's episode of the Center Mid Philosopher. We've got part 2 of 101 Fiercest Darbies. Just been having a blast doing these, and the more and more I dig deep on these, the more and more I feel like I'm starting to understand the world. It's just a deep psychological study on sociology, divisions of class, wealth, race, religion, and you really start to see consistent themes. I mean, that's not an earth-shattering comment, but at the same time, I feel like if you can really start to understand these Darbies, you really do understand the world a little bit deeper. It can be the beginnings of riots, wars, multi-generational, centuries-long prejudices. And, the other thing I would also mention is just when you get so close to some of these rivalries and derbies, it's insane how much they hate each other. And yet when you go to another continent and you reference some of these, people are like, I've never even heard of that. Meaning it's kind of a shame that people that are so close can build such rivalries of something that to the naked eye would be unnoticeable differences. That being said, we love a good derby. I mean, I love them, and that's one of the things that drew me into this beautiful game is that it's just chaos. It's society on the brink of collapse. I mean, it's like the fringes of societies. It's insanity. During this episode, you'll hear phrases like fleeing Constantinople during the Greco-Turkish War in 1919, the Mother's Day Massacre, a Clockwork Orange vibe, an air of megalomania. How can the tune of Karma Chameleon turn so violent? The wreckage of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, if you're not intrigued, I don't know how I can reach you or get you interested. But we got some really, really good ones today. We're going to just dive right on in. So perhaps one of the most intense in all of England, just diving right in, Millwall versus West Ham. The rivalry between Millwall and West Ham United is one of the longest standing and most bitter in English football. The two teams, then known as Millwall Athletic and Thames Ironworks, both originated in the East End of London and were located less than 3 miles apart. They first played each other in 1899 in the FA Cup. This match was historically known as the Dockers Derby. And so interestingly, this one, a lot of British former derbies are rooted in industry. Millwall was started with J.T. Morton factory, and it was a company that was established in Aberdeen in 1849. They made tinned and canned goods. And by the form of expansion, they opened their processing plant on the Millwall docks of South London. And they built a soccer team for their workers called Millwall Athletic to, build camaraderie, boost morale. The media nicknamed them the Lions of the South for their fighting spirit, a nickname that is stuck to this day. Thames Ironwork and Shipbuilding Company was the origins of what is now West Ham. It was originally called the Thames Ironworks Football Clubs, and they made ships. Disputes over how the club was run reached a boiling point, and Thames Ironworks was disbanded. Less than a month later, they were formed as West Ham United. But that's why they still have that their seal as the two iron, symbolizing iron and dock workers making ships, and they're nicknamed the Irons. During World War I and II, things really intensified, and they became ardently against one another. because they were working on opposing docks, different companies. They were kind of rival businesses, and they were vying for a lot of the same business, actually. In the 1926, the economy became tougher in England, and the dock workers sought a strike. But interestingly, the West Ham supporters were all very much in favor of the strike, whereas the Millwall, the JT Morton was not. And so that really intensified things because, it's nothing really fortifies a rivalry like, a union versus scabs, as they say. And this rivalry between the teams is deeply embedded in British football lore and culture. It's been depicted in books, movies, numerous things. In the 1970s, they started. It was really a really bad time for British hooliganism, and the origin of what we now know today as firms. And so the West Ham had the inner city firm, and Millwall had the Millwall bushwhackers. Violence really started to skyrocket at that point in time. In 1976, a tragic death of a Millwall supporter that was stabbed. And then in 1986, 10 years later, a Millwall supporter was stabbed in a riot and a clash between the two firms. Even in 2009, the Upton Park riot was widespread disorder between supporters. The ICF is the inner city firm for West Ham. They're known to leave calling cards when they do something violent. They literally leave calling cards that said, "You have just met the ICF." They've had some notable clashes along the day. One of the most famous on Mothering Sunday, March 21st of 2004, Millwall beat West Ham 4-1. Violence also broke out, and the opposing fans, a riot ensued, and the media nicknamed it the Mother's Day Massacre.
Have you seen Green Street Hooligans?
Yes, I have. It's insane.
And that movie really does a good job of touching upon some of the things that you're talking about.
Talk about over the top violence.
Yeah, for real.
I think one of the craziest is in 2006 during the World Cup when England was playing Paraguay. West Ham and Millwall supporters clashed against each other at that point in time, had a 100-person riot. 16 people were hospitalized. And, that's insane. You would think we're all on the same team. Literally, England's playing Paraguay, but no, they use as an excuse to riot against one another. So that's one of the all-time greats, Millwall, West Ham. Number 2, Hajduk split versus Dinamo Zagreb. Again, this one is set once again against the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia. They represent the two biggest cities in Croatia and has been dubbed the Eternal Derby. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, the Croatia's two biggest clubs settled into mutual loathing. Few derbies in the Balkans, arguably anywhere in Europe, are as explosive as Dinamo versus Hajduk. The violence marring every single match. Interestingly, before the breakup of the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, the two clubs were actually quite friendly, even attending each other's matches. And that back then, the enemy was anything Serbian, so Red Star and Partizan Belgrade. And they actually, in the civil war back then of Croatian independence, they fought alongside each other in their independence. It's kind of hard to feel like where they started to really start to hate one another, but once Croatia gained its independence, some people think that almost like Hajduk needed some foe, and instead of Red Star and Partizan Belgrade being the enemy, it just sort of became Dinamo Zagreb, because Dinamo Zagreb was viewed as the new kind of centralist government figure. And for Hajduk, they have a word that they love to describe their culture, which is despet in Croatian, which means a defiance, to go against the grain, to just really fight for their own, and so they're just a very iconoclastic, antagonistic, fiercely independent group. And they kind of moved their hatred towards Dinamo Zagreb, and it's very much alive and well today. One of the crazier things that has Zvonimir Boban, the Dinamo captain, jumped up, kicked, and punched a policeman in a rivalry before being dragged away. This is during a game, and that earned Boban's being banned for the 1990 World Cup. So Hajduk's ultra group is called Torcida, which was inspired by the Brazilian word. Just torcida means supporter. So Hajduk Split took a lot of their I don't want to say hooliganism, but ultras fan group ideologies from Brazil, and the group in Dinamo Zagreb is called the Bad Blue Boys, and they clash quite a bit. It's a very violent rivalry derby. That's a really, really good one. All right, jumping to number 3 is Fla-Flu in Rio de Janeiro. So Flamengo versus Fluminense. There's 4 teams in Rio: Botafogo, Vasco da Gama, Fluminense, and Flamengo. Fluminense formed in 1902 by a little bit more of an upper-class society. Flamengo in 1911 by a group of disgruntled players unhappy with Fluminense's elitism. So haves are sort of the flu, and the have-nots are sort of the fla, as in Flamengo. People often cite the political polarization in the country, particularly in Rio, as the Fla-Flu divide. So that's a really good one. Part of this may be down to the pleasing phonetics of that derby. Fla-Flu has a nice ring to it. But the Fla-Flu has much to do with the way that football was popularized in Brazil, the form that myths were invented and traditions created. Flamengo is referred to as the Mangoa, boasts the largest fan base in Brazil. Fluminense referred to as the Tricolor. They play in the same stadium, actually, the Macarena Stadium, which holds 78,000. However, there have been claims that some of their games have had even up to 177,000 in attendance, which is crazy. Just some incredible players that have come through this rivalry. So from Flamengo, Adriano, Kleberson, Zico, Bebeto, Juan, Barbosa, otherwise known as Gabigol, Fluminense, Romario, Rivellino, Fred, Deco, and Ronaldo. So, maybe a lot of listeners and viewers didn't know of that one, and probably some of your favorite players came through that rivalry that you maybe didn't ordinarily know about.
It's so interesting to me to see that pretty much every rivalry that we talked about, it comes from something off the pitch.
Yep.
Almost exclusively, it's either business or race or just some othering factor besides the actual game.
Yeah, so that kind of at the beginning, that's what I was saying, is like, particularly in South America, the class warfare is really pronounced, as is European origins versus purely South American origins. There's a real divide of, this club it's very wealth centric and very ethnic origin centered, which is, that informs a lot of South America today. You hear a lot of people in South America say, oh, Argentina, they think they're so European, they're such highfalutin, and that kind of comes from the likes of Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, even though some would say Uruguay is a little bit European as well. But and then certainly wealth. Those are probably the 2 biggest in South America I've seen. All right, jumping to number 4, a really big one, a juicy one, Derby dell'Italia. So Inter Milan versus Juventus. There's tons of derbies in Italy, and we'll cover them all. But this one is a big one because they're the 2 most successful clubs in Italy, in Serie A's history, and Juventus being the most successful and Inter being number 2. So that's really the root of this. Derby dell'Italia was authored by a journalist in the 16s because they're the most dominant teams. Some of AC Milan and some other clubs have really caught up, particularly in the 80s and 90s. But at the origin of Serie A, it was really all Juventus and Inter, and they're constantly competing for titles. And that famed star, every 10 domestic titles they get to put another star on their jerseys. And the Agnelli family became just obsessed with gaining that third star over Inter. But for the first 50 years of the rivalry, there wasn't too much of a rivalry. But in 1961, that changed drastically. A game that would go on to decide the Scudetto. So many fans attended the game that the stands were over capacity, and supporters from both sides invaded the pitch, and the game had to be abandoned. Also in the mix there is that during the 60s, Helenio Herrera came into play for Inter. In 1998, a clash that was so contentious with Ronaldo and Del Piero featured that the outcome will still be debated to this very day about whether Ronaldo should have received a penalty kick. I think where they really poured gasoline on this derby was in 2006 with Calciopoli, which was the Juventus match fixing that went on for seemingly, years. I mean, who knows how long, but, Juventus was known to be in charge of picking referees, and you can really go back and look at the tapes and see in key games, key moments where maybe a penalty should have been awarded or shouldn't, that, maybe the refs kind of gave the nod a little bit more to Juventus. So, and they were convicted of that, and they had to relinquish a few of their titles, which went to Inter. Juventus was relegated to Serie B during that time. And so that derby is alive and well. And, right this very moment, look up on who's the leaders of Serie A. Well, it's Inter, number one. With 1 point behind them is Juventus. So that one is very much current. So that's a great one.
And we touch upon a lot more deep dive on our Serie A episode too that we did. So if you want to, get a little bit more, I suggest, you go back and watch that one.
Yeah, please. That's one of my all-time favorite episodes, and I love doing that one. And my kind of a love letter to Serie A and Italian-style football. So number 5, another massive one, a juicy one, the Intercontinental Derby, Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce, also known as the Istanbul Derby, Bonkers by the Bosphorus, Yellow Canaries versus Simbam, Flowers, Cologne, and Chocolate. Flowers, cologne, and chocolate. What are you talking about? Well, the Fenerbahce fans throw chocolate, flowers, and lemon scented cologne on the visiting Galatasaray players. That's a wild one. So Istanbul is an interesting city, because it's divided by the Bosphorus, and it's on the west is Europe, and on the east is Asia. So it's actually technically an intercontinental derby set in one city. And Galatasaray was started a little bit more by the bourgeois upper crust, actually from a school called Galatasaray School, which is where a lot of the European elite went during the Ottoman Empire. It's actually a school started in the 1400s, one of the oldest in all of Europe. And Fenerbahce is that of a little bit more of the working class of Asian, a little bit more workhorse, work ethic. Galatasaray has a little bit more of British roots, and again, you see that kind of European underpinning core, set amongst, no, we're a little bit more localism. We're more Istanbul centered. Yeah, interestingly too, this derby was started before Turkey even existed as a country. It was set against the Ottoman Empire. And interestingly too, Fenerbahce has a famous fan, big time lifelong fan, Mustafa Ataturk, the hard drinking general and statesman who was regarded as the founder of the modern Turkey in 1923. And who is supposed to have known as blessed Fenerbahce with eternal success. And Fenerbahce fans love this claim that they're kind of attached with Turkish independence, and especially the older generation really view Fenerbahce as sort of an independent and the Turkish club, whereas Galatasaray can be viewed as a little bit more European leaning. As is often the case, these started out pretty friendly in 1909, but in 1934 things turned sour when rough fouling led to bench-clearing brawls and riots in the stands. Another crazy moment is known as Suey plants his colors in the ground in 1996. So Graham Souness became an instant hero on the side of the Bosphorus and persona non grata when he celebrated Galatasaray's win at home by planting the Galatasaray flag on the Fenerbahce field at the center of the field. The incident earned the brass-balled boss the nickname Ulubatali Souness after comparisons with the national hero Ulubati Hassan, who was part of he planted the flag after a battle, the Ottoman flag during the siege of Constantinople in 1453. Another tragic thing occurred, and even as recent as 2013, a 19-year-old Fenerbahce fan was stabbed to death by a Galatasaray supporter. So again, this is a great one, so check out that one, Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce. So number 6, big one, the Derby of Eternal Enemies. So Olympiacos versus Panathinaikos, the mother of all battles, as it is known. It's such a violent and vitriolic rivalry that in 2004 the decision was made to prohibit away fans from attending the games. Some say that decisions actually made things worse, as the home fans have no one to direct their anger towards, so they direct it towards coaches, players, media. Interestingly, Panathinaikos was established first in 1908, a little bit more in the center of Athens. And it was, as the name suggests, it was supposed to represent the whole of Athens. Olympiacos entered in 1925, merged from 2 clubs in the port of Piraeus, which was a little bit further away from Athens back then, but due to urban sprawl, it's very much part of center Athens now. The name Olympiacos was chosen to express power, athleticism, ethos, noble competition, of course, the Olympic ideal. The 2 clubs have not managed to agree on anything since, not even where their hatred for one another began. The popular view is, like a lot of these origins or these derbies, is that Panathinaikos fans used to come from, a little bit more upper middle class society, whereas Olympiacos were a little bit more of the poorer dock workers, port workers by Piraeus, just south of the capital. That's not as much the case to this day, but, it's viewed that Panathinaikos represents the establishment, and Olympiacos is a little bit more anti-establishment, if you will. But interestingly enough is that, from the outsiders, both are very much the Greek establishment. If anyone, AEK Athens is a little bit more of the independent, the refugees, a little bit more of the independent group now. Some crazy moments in the Olympiacos Panathinaikos derby, June 1930. Olympiacos fans arrived at the derby carrying green coffins, full of confidence that they would win. Staged an improvised funeral for their rivals. Panathinaikos went on to smash them 8-2, smashing the coffins and beating them with the green wood. So that was a big one. In 1964, an infamous cup semifinal had to be abandoned as both sets of fans destroyed the Leoforos, pulling down the goal, smashing everything imaginable, and setting parts of the stadium on fire. There are tales of skirmishes and violence, going back to 1930, a series of interruptions, missiles thrown on the field. It's crazy. The other thing I would say about this, here's another one. Even as recently in 2007, hooligans gathered at a prearranged battle in the eastern suburb of Polania, where the two clubs were due to contest a women's volleyball game. And at that game, Milhel Philopoulos, a 22-year-old Panathinaikos fan, was stabbed to death at a women's volleyball game. So, not to undermine women's volleyball games, but that seems a little bit extreme. Over the past 2 decades, however, the rivalry has been overshadowed by Olympiakos' clear dominance on the pitch. Although I will say Panathinaikos has had a little bit more success in Europe. Actually, they went on. They lost in the semifinals to Liverpool in 1985. They lost to Juventus in 1996, whereas Olympiakos have never progressed past the quarterfinals. Another thing about this rivalry is the really intense ownership groups of these clubs. So for Olympiakos, the president is Evangelos Marinakis, has come to symbolize Olympiakos' power. He's a 55-year-old shipping and media mogul. In the case of Panathinaikos, 65-year-old shipping magnate and media mogul Giannis Alafouzos. They're both a little bit corrupt, even have been alleged to shipping Russian oil around the world when the whole world has said we shouldn't do that anymore. But there have been cases of each of those owners actually storming the pitch during the derby and receiving yellow and red cards themselves, which is unique to say the least. The Panathinaikos Ultras are known as Gate 13, where they sit. The stadium is known as Leoforos, and it's just covered in graffiti and all sorts of menacing images, such as Alex from A Clockwork Orange and a pig wearing a soldier's helmet with a meat cleaver through it. It's a really intense atmosphere. And then Olympiakos' Ultras is known as Gate 7, and they sing Karma Chameleon to a journalist said, I never knew Karma Chameleon could sound so menacing and scary, but somehow they've done it. They have a banner that says, we rule this world. So that's that one, Panathinaikos, Olympiakos. Number 7, I'm popping in an MLS one in here again, just to, I think what's cool about this is that, we talk about a lot of the origins, a lot of these derbies, and where they often just start with good branding and good journalists naming things. And, 100 years later, they've become these massive brands unto themselves. So this one, El Tráfico, LAFC versus LA Galaxy. We're in the infancy in a lot of these derbies, but this one is really legit. And LA Galaxy is obviously one of the OGs of the MLS, and they've got 5 championships, and they've had Landon Donovan and David Beckham and Ibrahimovic, and they're a little bit more the gold standard. But LAFC is new on the scene, and they're in the heart of LA. They have really embraced much more of a Hispanic kind of identity, black and gold colors. The crest is very much of LA, and they've kind of got like a sort of a LA Raiders, Oakland Raiders kind of a vibe going, and they're tough, and their fan base has quickly become one of the most intense in all of MLS. And they've won a championship here lately. They've had the likes of Chiellini and Diego Rosa, and of course the legendary Carlos Vela, and then who could forget Gareth Bale. So El Tráfico may be the best in MLS right now, and I think that one, 10, 20, 30 years from now, we'll be looking back and saying that may be one of the best derbies in the whole world. So number 8, El Gran Derby, Real Betis versus Sevilla. this city is divided properly in half. This one doesn't have quite as many socioeconomic, religious, class, wealth divides, political divides. This one's a little bit more ubiquitous. I think what's unique about Real Betis and Sevilla is that it splits families. I mean, spouses the wife is a Betico or Betica, as they say, and the husband will be a Sevillista. Some even in Spain, outside of Spain, everyone says, of course, El Clasico, Real Madrid versus Barcelona is the biggest derby of all time. But those in Spain say El Gran Derby may be the best of all. And some of the crazy things that have happened there is that in 1997, the Real Betis fans basically lost a game to Gijón on purpose just so that Sevilla could be relegated. And not only did they do that, they literally chased the team or celebrated with the Gijón all the way to the airport, followed their bus to the plane, celebrating that win that they lost. And then 3 years later, in 2000, it's known as divine justice. It happened again, only this way, the opposite. Sevilla pretty much laid down and lost to Real Oviedo on purpose just so that Real Betis would get relegated. The two clubs are only 2.5 miles apart. And again, nothing quite portrays the how close these rivalries are other than Diego Rodriguez, who was captain of Betis, crossed over to Sevilla. Betis fans never forgave him. No more so than his wife, who remained a Betica, even in his days at Sevilla. And his kids are Sevillistas. His grandchildren are split one each. Another great story is Joaquin is a legendary Real Betis player, and he was one time they beat Sevilla, and he told his whole team, if you're not out partying till 5 a.m., you're going to be fined. So that's a great one. Number 9 is a great one, El Superclásico, Chivas versus Club America. 60 million fans, 22 red cards, attacks with metal pipes, Mexico's craziest derby. I mean, this one is really a philosophical difference. So Club America is that of Mexico City, wealth. It is, those famous royal blue, red, and cream colored yellow. They were really in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They're owned by television executives. So they were just ubiquitous on Mexican television and really viewed as kind of like an AC Milan almost with Berlusconi, just had the media. Chivas is, everyone knows, only fields Mexican-born players. So Club America is a very international, embracing club. Chivas is not. You have to be born in Mexico to play for them. Club America is nicknamed Los Millonarios, and Chivas, known as Equipo del Pueblo, the team for the people. They're known as the Goats. That was nickname was a derogatory joke at them in the 40s, and it stuck. Some crazy moments there. 1944, a mass brawl ended up with both teams having 4 red cards. Then there's the brawls of 83 and 86. In 1983, the game in which Chivas upset America and Estadio Azteca was marred by so much violence and fighting that the refs eventually ran out of the stadium. In 86 was even worse when all 22 players fought and all 22 were red carded. Another thing that's interesting about El Superclásico is it bleeds and it merges into America. Because with the growing Hispanic population, in 2018, an America fan, Hilario Cruz, was severely beaten by Chivas fans outside of the Great Bowl in Lodi, California. During that fight, someone lost an eye. There have been brawls of more than 100 people. So they definitely clash in America as well. So everyone knows that one, Club America versus Chivas. And then number 10, an off the beaten path one, the Osaka Derby, Gamba Osaka and Cerezo Osaka. It's a local rivalry between 2 Osakan clubs in Japan with strong regional ties. The two sides have met on 64 occasions, and Gamba Osaka has been historically superior with 28 wins. In the 1970s, Jan-Mark Diesel, co-founder of the J League, and they, similar to these old school British clubs, they were really tied to local companies. Most of the club was part of Matsushita Electrical Industrial Company in the J League. And so that's a really, really cool one. And as I said, I would bring some off the beaten path ones there. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of 101 Fiercest Darbies on the Center Mid Philosopher. Hope you learned something. Hope you learned something a little bit more about the world. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, and send to your friends. And if you have ideas for guests, please let us know and comment. Thank you.